The idea is that in an ecosystem you have various parts, and this is something that we realized while working with a lot of companies. And I always find the metaphor really interesting when you look at a Lego set. When you first open the box, you're pretty much overwhelmed with all the pieces, right? They're all nice, but it is how do they fit together? And if you don't follow the instruction plan, you're not going to end up with something looking like this. It's probably going to be a mess. But the idea is not the plan. The idea is you fitting them together, right? In the same way, in an ecosystem, you have all these moving parts that need to fit together somehow. Probably you've all been mandated to innovate, and probably you've all seen or heard or used some of these buzzwords here, right? You've probably seen labs. You've probably been tasked by your CEO to build a lab, or to do some management training, or to do a design thinking hackathon, or do any type of hackathon for that matter, right? The idea is that all these things, these are all tiny Lego bricks for your ecosystem. How do they fit together, right? When do you know you need to do a lab? When do you know you don't need to do a lab? When do you know you need to do trainers? When do you need to do executive training, right? So this is a question I've been trying to get my head around, because I always go back to whenever I go to the doctor, I don't want to walk up into his office and him telling me, you should take this pill, and the other. The first thing I want him to do is ask me some questions. Like, what are my symptoms? And then prescribe me drugs. These are pretty much it. This is pretty much drugs, right? It's like, here, go take them. You should not. First of all, you need to understand your ecosystem. You need to understand how all the parts of your company work together before you actually take action, before you take any action, right? To start improving it. So, that being said, I was really fascinated with measuring innovation. I was really fascinated about how do we put numbers to innovation, and not just to innovation, but to your entire ecosystem. The idea is that measurements have impact, and they have impact on your actions. And your actions obviously have consequences. So if you're now probably going to think about, let's train the entire organization in Agile, or in Lean, or in design thinking, that's going to have a price tag, right? That's going to cost you some money. And if you don't get the right return on that, all that lump of money is gone. You could have probably done something else. The idea is your ecosystem ready to receive the training? Does your ecosystem need that particular training? So this being said, we were looking at structuring the entire ecosystem and looking at the ecosystem as a funnel. How many of you are familiar with the AA, ARRR, or the pyramid metric funnel? I just want to know, show of hands, yeah, not that many people? Okay, I'm going to explain it briefly. This is something that startups use, especially in software as a service or mobile technologies. This is something that originated in San Francisco some time ago. It's called the pirate metric because it's the acronym for, the acronym is R, like the pirates do in movies. The acronym is acquisition, activation, retention, referral, revenues, like a funnel, right? And we've used this model to look at how can you measure innovation? How can you measure innovation output? How can you measure your ecosystem using this? We identified that the acquisition phase, in this phase, the biggest question is how many ideas are being generated or being brought into the ecosystem? If you measure that before you take any action, you might realize that there's not enough ideas coming into the ecosystem. You might just realize that, hey, we probably have a problem with ideation. And these are some of the things you can do. So your hackathons, idea challenges, collaborations with universities, mergers and acquisition. These are things that address the problem of, do we have enough ideas? But this is really interesting because this actually is talking about only the ideation part. And in our research, we've realized that we just finished this research last week, and this is actually new stuff. Only 1 in 3 companies, they have a clear ideation process. Most of the companies nowadays, they don't have a clear ideation process. They basically let everybody come up with ideas and do it a bit chaotic, a bit ad hoc, if you want. This is a problem. You see, there's one in 3 companies on the other side that have no ideation process. So one has, in 3 companies, one of them has a clear ideation process, one has somewhat a clear ideation process, and one has no ideation process. I'm wondering how these people are actually doing here, the ones that have no ideation process. What's really interesting also is that the criteria for selecting ideas, talking about how you measure, right? You might realize that yes, we don't have enough ideas coming into the ecosystem. You need to ask yourself why. Maybe we are doing everything right. Yeah, maybe we are having the hackathons. Maybe we are having the idea challenges. Maybe we are doing M&A. But the idea is that are your criteria transparent? Maybe people are not engaged with your company. They are not engaged in trying to generate ideas because your criteria for selecting ideas is not transparent. Right? This is a research we've done on 50 companies, so it's not that big, but they were spread globally. So this is what we found. Another thing which was really shocking for us, it's how do companies invest in ideas, right? Because again, ideas are being generated, but if you don't invest in them, if you don't take them to the next level, you're still going to be stuck with a lot of ideas. And the cycle of money goes like money converted into ideas, ideas then converted back into money. If you're just stuck with the first part of your equation, you have a problem. The idea is that only, you can see, numbers are basically talking by themselves. Yeah, they have a problem with this particular stage of investing. The next phase of the ecosystem is activation, right? So we've generated the ideas. Let's say we moved it out of the way. The next part is it was acquisition. Now we're in activation. Activation, we're talking about how many ideas are actually being worked on. Right? It's one thing to generate them. It's one thing to have that one-day hackathon. It's one thing to have that one-day idea challenge. Now, how many ideas are being actually worked on following the hackathon? This is the activation phase. And a lot of ecosystems suffer here. Some actions you can take, management training or train-the-trainers program. Help people help others work on their idea. What's really interesting here is that Lean Startup is not a silver bullet. A lot of people have the idea like, oh, Lean Startup is cool because it's an iterative process, and it doesn't matter actually what ideas we put in. If the ideas are going to be terrible at the beginning, it's okay, we're going to iterate on them and everything is going to be fine. No. No. It's trash in, trash out. If you have a poor ideation process at the beginning, you're going to have poor ideas coming out the other end. Again, it's part of our research. Moving into the retention part of your ecosystem, right? So you've generated the ideas and you started working on them, right? You have trainers, you have people working on the ideas. Well, the next question you need to ask yourself in your ecosystem is, how many ideas actually make it to market? Right? It's one thing to start working on them. Well, are you actually able, is your ecosystem able to actually push ideas to the market? And here is where you might have your innovation lab or accelerator program or venture capital arm. Right? Everybody's saying like, oh yeah, we need to create a lab. Well, do you need a lab? Do you have a problem in retention in your ecosystem? Because if you have a retention problem, then probably the lab is the solution. But if you don't have a retention problem, maybe you're doing just fine. But remember one thing, that just relying on your lab for solutions or for innovation solution is not going to work for you. This is a research done on all the venture capital companies in the US. Do you think you can beat those odds? Do you seriously think you can be better than the VC company? Look at it, 65% of all ideas VCs in the US investing return in between 0 and 1 time the initial investment. So in best case scenario, they're just going to break even, 65%. Do you still think you can be better than this? So this is why innovation needs to happen at scale. Just having that lab addressing innovation is not enough. You need to do it at scale. I'm running a workshop this afternoon, so feel free to join. We're going to talk about how do you govern innovation and what's the benefit of doing it at scale. The next part is referral, right? So we can talk about revenue referral. I prefer referral first. Is your ecosystem an evergreen one? This is the main question here. Are we generating perpetual ideas in the ecosystem? So the questions here are, how many ideas have we generated from the existing ideas, basically meaning pivots? Or not necessarily a pivot, but some product teams might just go ahead and build that, and as they're building that, they stumble upon some really interesting learnings, and they will pretty much start creating a new growth avenue from that one. Maybe a new team needs to be formed because they've uncovered something really interesting. Here, there's a lot of things you can do. You can do internal conferences, people talking together. If you're running a company on multiple time zones, maybe it's going to be a good idea for everybody to meet once a year and talk about all the new ideas, what they're working on. You know, have people cross-pollinate, basically, right? Case studies, entries in competitions. You can have your teams go to startup weekends, only startup machines, or anything like that externally, right? To get inspired, to talk with other like-minded innovators, right? Attend conferences like this. So this is all about referral, and you're already taking some actions here. Like there's a lot of case studies today presented by local companies. Those are basically referral initiatives. Like those companies are coming here, presenting what they're doing, and who knows, maybe they're going to get inspired and find new growth avenues from here, or you're going to get inspired and change your ecosystem. So this is part of referral. Another one, this is actually the last one. How much money is your ecosystem generating? Just doing it without measuring it doesn't make sense, right? And the best way to measure innovation at one point is like, how much money have you made? And here, there are some indicators, some KPIs, and the KPIs is one of actually my favorites, is how much money have you generated in the past 3 years from the ideas you've created 3 years ago, right? If you don't measure that, and if you're not able to put a tag on that, you don't know if your process actually works. There are some companies that have this particular KPI as a performance indicator for managers, for VPs. I'm talking about Cisco here and 3M. They are using that when they measure the performance of executives that have profit and loss, like targets, right? They are basically asking them, how much money is your department generating from ideas that they launched 3 years ago? So you might be really strong on managing the core, meeting your financial expectations on core. But if you're not meeting your financial expectation on this particular KPI, as a VP in these companies, you can pretty much be fired, because it means that you are not addressing the innovation problem. You're not growing your company, right? Of course, there's M&A. You can always improve your performance with mergers and acquisition, but the problem is that ideally you also do some validation before you acquire, because just acquiring it's not enough. You also need to see if it makes sense to acquire that company. First of all, can you grow it? Is it sustainable within your ecosystem? Can you actually help it to grow further? So M&A is definitely a go-to solution for this part. But again, just doing M&A is not going to be enough, right? And you can do joint ventures. You can talk with other companies. You can collaborate in groups, right? If you have a competition, basically competitor, but you work together, you can do that. You can lower your cost by running that particular model, right? Shared resources. You know that Toyota, for example, is working with Peugeot and Citroën, and they build a car that's pretty much the same car for all three brands, but they are just labeling it differently. Right? And they're selling it in their channel, but they share the cost of research and development, they share the cost of production. Why? Because they wanted to improve their revenue in their ecosystems. The idea is that you have to have a holistic view of your ecosystem. This is basically the takeaway for you. Right? You can, the slides are going to be shared. I'm sure you took pictures of this. But the idea is that you need to have a holistic view just by looking at what can I do next, that next train the trainers, that next lab, that next management training, that next executive challenge. That's not going to be enough. You need to understand in a context, does that make sense? Is it something that I am actually going to benefit from as a company? And not just that, but does it fit with all the other parts? Think about the Lego. Does this particular brick fit with all the other bricks that are already laid down? Thank you very much.